What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I'm recording this on Monday, July 13th. I may or may not get it out today or tomorrow, but we shall see. I know it's been a while since I have hopped on the pod, and apologies to all the listeners for that. I've been very, very busy in my personal and work life recently, so have not found a time to get on, and I wanted to make sure that it was worthwhile when I did. So doing a little bit of a delayed reaction to the NBA draft on this episode today. So I'm going to do my normal format where I go through the lottery and make my predictions for all-star role player busts. Tried to keep it a little shorter this year. I tried is the key word there, so we'll see. I know sometimes I get on a tangent with these because I love doing the prospect stuff. So, but with that said, we can go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to do the same draft segment that I've been doing for 4 years now. This will be the 5th year now that I have done this format where basically I go through each of the lottery picks and decide whether they will be an all-star, a role player, or a bust. Most time around the draft, people always want to talk about mostly the positives and all the comps are these really good players. But the reality is the data shows that a lot of these guys are not going to pan out. And if we just look at the last 10, what I'm calling qualified drafts, I ignore the last 4 drafts just because I don't think that you've really had enough time to grow into the player that you're probably going to be in the first couple of years. A lot of guys get off to slow starts because they're rookies. Not a lot of guys are making all-stars until they're in their 3rd, 4th, 5th season at earliest anyway. So it kind of skews the stats. So if you look at the last 10 quote-unquote qualified years, which I would call 2013 to 2022, the average breakdown by year is 5.7 busts in the lottery, 4.5 role players, and 3.8 all-stars. And I try to make this as objective as possible. If you're an all-star, plain and simple, means you made an all-star team. The way I'm qualifying busts versus role players, I use win shares as the key stat. It's an advanced metric, which basically measures the impact that you had towards winning, but it is a cumulative stat. So it also takes into account longevity. You could have guys that were never particularly great, but played long enough where they ended up putting together pretty decent careers. You could also have guys that peaked at a really high level, but then didn't play as long. Overall, it ends up averaging out to be a pretty accurate thing across the board. So I would consider a bust anyone who had less than 2 win shares per season on average since the year they were drafted up to about 10 years. If you have a 10-year career and you're hitting that mark, I would consider it basically a pretty successful career, and at least you could qualify yourself as a role player. So that's how I'm going to measure it. So I'm going to go through each of the lottery picks and do a quick scouting report on each one and then make my prediction for each one. I'm going to try to keep this a little shorter than what I've done in years past. So I do intend this to be a little bit more condensed, a little less detailed than what I've done just because I'm a little behind on getting some of this content out. Don't want to bore people when the draft's already a couple weeks past at this point, but do still want to make sure that I get my picks in and have this documented for you guys. Okay, so starting off with the number 1 overall pick, we had Dybantsa, the wing out of BYU, getting drafted to the Washington Wizards, who won the lottery earlier this spring. And Dybantsa was the consensus number 1 prospect for the most part. There was some debate throughout the year, but towards the end of the college basketball season, it was pretty clear that he was the guy on most people's boards at the top. But he was a monster in his 1 year at BYU, averaged over 25 points a game, around 7 rebounds, just under 4 assists, 51% from the field, had a massive 34% usage rate, a nice 7'1" wingspan to go along with his 6'9", 215 frame. And this dude is a physical beast. I mean, the prototypical NBA body for a wing. He's already way more filled out than most guys we see at his age, at his size, coming into the league. Caleb Wilson as sort of a comparison there. Somebody who's a little bit more frail, hasn't filled out quite as much, but has such an elite combination of size, length, power, strength, explosiveness. He's a really nice athlete, but his superpower is getting downhill to the basket. He puts elite pressure on the rim. Over 40% of his field goal attempts came at the rim last season, and he finished at 63% at the basket, despite carrying that number 1 load. Got to the line almost 9 times per game, one of the highest marks in the country. He's got excellent footwork, a legitimate 3-level scorer, shot 47% off the dribble and mid-range jumpers. And he could just do it all offensively. He significantly improved as a creator, averaged just under 4 assists, as I mentioned, even though there were pretty big questions about that coming into college. And that number increased once his teammate Richie Saunders got hurt down the stretch of the season. His assist numbers went up, his usage went up, his game scaled in an efficient manner. So again, not some elite playmaker, but certainly showed progress there, and progress as just generally a processor on the court. And so offensively, he really does check every box on that front, except for the if you're going to nitpick him, the ball handling could get a little tighter, but I don't foresee him being some ball dominant type player necessarily. So I think if he can operate in the mid range and attacking the basket like he's shown, then that shouldn't be a big issue for him. And then the 3-point shot was a little bit inconsistent here. So he only shot 33% from 3 overall, only 30% on catch and shoot, which obviously is not great. He's strangely always more comfortable shooting off the dribble than off the catch, which is a little counterintuitive to what we normally see. And his free throw percentage, 77%, is at least in that range where you're like, okay, he clearly has some touch. He's got the mid-range feel for the game, and then he's got good finishing ability at the basket. But he hasn't proven all the way that he can stretch that out to the 3-point line. And then additionally, some of the defensive engagement isn't always there. More as an off-ball defender, I think he's got the tools and skills to be fine defensively, or at least average. But he does need to get a little bit more engaged on that end. And then some of the decision-making, as I mentioned, as a processor on the court could be better. 3 turnovers a game to those 4 assists. So not a spectacular ratio, but again, his usage rate was through the ceiling. So you expect the turnover to be a little bit higher than you might for some of these other guys. But overall, I've got AJ as an all-star. I think he has the best combination of high ceiling and high floor, where I feel really confident he's going to come into the league and be able to score 20 plus points per game. The question is going to be how impactful are those points. I do think there's a world where he's more of like a DeMar DeRozan type, where he doesn't quite shoot enough threes and the ball's a little stoppy at times. And even though he's getting his points, are those leading to wins in impactful basketball? I'm not saying that that's my prediction for him. Obviously, even though DeMar DeRozan was an all-star, I think AJ Dybantsa has a much higher ceiling and upside than what DeRozan had as a player throughout his career, mostly because of his physical traits and his ability to get downhill to the basket. And DeRozan really does rely almost exclusively on that mid-range shot there. But he's an elite advantage creator with legitimate wing size, and that's among the most valuable archetypes in today's NBA. And he already has so many translatable skills with rim pressure, shot creation, mid-range scoring. He draws fouls, and his biggest swing skills will be that shooting. But, the 3-point shot, the form looks fine. He's been able to score fine in the mid-range and rely pretty heavily on that. And he's a tough shot maker. So I think the shot will be good enough. And I think that he can be so good as an inside the arc scorer that even if he's never more than an average 3-point shooter, he can still be an all-star. So I think Dybantsa has legitimate all-NBA upside, and to me, very worthy of the number 1 pick in this draft. Then moving to number 2, Darryn Peterson, drafted to Utah out of Kansas, another one-and-done prospect, another guy that was a top high school recruit, a guy that many had above Dybantsa at times in high school, and he had a little bit of a weird year at Kansas. The stats, he still averaged 20 plus points per game, but the efficiency was a little bit down. People questioned his burst. The athleticism didn't quite look the same as it had in college, but let's not get confused here. This guy's an elite 3-level scorer still, one of the smoothest offensive players in the class. He's comfortable at the rim and the mid-range from 3. He's got great pace and body control, rarely looks sped up. He's a really high-level shooter. He was 38% from 3 on 7 attempts in his freshman year at Kansas, shot 48% off the catch and shoot, so that's a really good number and should translate well. And he can shoot off movement, coming off screens, pull-ups, spot-ups, whatever it is. The shot is just looks silky smooth in any capacity of which he gets it off. He's got a really advanced handle. He's a guy that can work out of the isolation, looks really comfortable there. And he's got size too. He's a very comfortable 6'5", so we don't have to worry about a lot of the concerns of some of these small guards. Like, he's built to be able to hold his own defensively, but also be able to shoot over guys. And he's got the ideal NBA frame for a modern combo guard, if you will. I think he really can play the one or the two, depending on what role is needed out of him. And defensively, he's got a nearly 6'10 wingspan, so that should give him some good positional versatility. And like I mentioned, offensively, he could play the lead guard. He can be the secondary creator. He can be an off-ball scorer. He really can do it all there, depending on what the team needs out of him. There obviously have been some concerns with Peterson. The medical part of it is the main one. He missed 11 games during college. There were a lot of questions about the cramping episodes that he had throughout the year, his will to want to play because he would call himself out of games, etc. I'm not going to speculate too much about that. I tend to think that if the guy really thought he could play, he would play. I think that's true for almost everybody. So I'm sure he really was injured, but it's still fair to have concerns about those injuries and what that might look like long-term for him. But there were a couple other yellow flags at the very least for Peterson in college. I don't think it's talked about enough. His playmaking was really underwhelming. He finished the season with 38 assists and 38 turnovers, a 1-to-1 ratio on the dot. Not exactly what you want to see out of a guy with his type of volume and a guy that you want being your lead guard on an NBA offense. We know he can score, but is he going to make guys around him better? That's still a little bit of a question mark there. He also didn't quite get to the rim as much as we saw in high school. Only about 15% of his half-court shots came at the rim. That's a really low number, so he settled for jumpers a lot. He's much more perimeter-oriented in college than he was in high school. Again, I don't know if some of that was because of the physical limitations, but either the injury concerns there or the just shift in playing style is something to consider as well. And that lended itself to tough shot selection at times. He likes difficult jumpers and he can settle for pull-ups. And he wasn't overly efficient in those looks. He shot only 5 for 30 on pull-up threes out of the pick and roll this season. So I think he needs to look for easier shots, and I think he is capable of getting them. And look, he's a good athlete, not a spectacular one. So, but with all that said, even with the concerns, I think the talent is just too great for Peterson. I think that if the injury stuff is clearly in the past, we could look back and think it's silly that Peterson didn't go number 1 in this draft. So I'm going to pick him as an all-star. I just think his combination of shooting, creation, his handle, his flashes as a passer, and his positional size make him just a salivating prospect and a guy that really any team could use in the modern NBA. His archetype is very sought after. I think the assist numbers definitely do get overlooked a little bit, but that a lot of that could have been contextually with Kansas, where they had other ball handlers that couldn't really shoot super well. So Peterson was kind of forced into a little bit of an off-ball role, and some of it was the injury stuff too, in and out of the lineup. Whatever. He's got all NBA upside. I think that he is, just like Dybantsa, not going to be one of these one-time all-stars, but a multi-time all-star. And even in his absolute worst case, he's still going to be a useful scorer, spark plug guy, which is not a terrible thing to fall back on, but it's going to, how much he can sort of orchestrate an offense is going to determine his ceiling. But I've got Peterson as an all-star. Next, we've got Cam Boozer, who went 3rd to the Grizzlies, another one-and-done freshman out of Duke, another consensus top 3 pick. These top 3 were a little interchangeable depending on who you asked. He was the Naismith National Player of the Year in his one season at Duke, led them to the number 1 overall seed. He's 6'9", a beefy 252, 7'2" wingspan. He's still just 18 years old on draft nights. So very young for his class as well, but he put up absolute monster numbers, 23, 10, and 4 on 56% from the field, 39% from 3. Got to the free throw line with high frequency. The 3-point volume went up as the season went along, 22 double-doubles. A guy that it felt like every single game, even if he didn't have a great game, you'd look up and you'd be like, oh, still chugged away to that 19 and 9 on 3 assists on 50% shooting. So just the ultimate epitome of consistency throughout college. And that's really been the story of his entire career. It was the same thing in high school for him. And so a lot of people view him as one of the safest offensive prospects in this draft, and really one of the safest in years. I mean, he checks really every box. He's extremely versatile on that end of the court. He can score in the post. He can face you up. He can run the pick and roll or be the screener on a pick and roll. He can spot up. He's good in transition. And like I said, he just rarely has an off night. Produces at a rate that we just really haven't seen in terms of just level of consistency there. And a lot of that comes back to his elite feel for the game. I think he's got probably the highest basketball IQ in the class, constantly makes the correct read, plays it at his own pace, doesn't really get sped up. He was playing forward, sometimes even center, still average over 4 assists per game with a very solid assist to turnover ratio. He can be the offensive hub for you. He can be a point forward. He can play off the ball, though, too. So his versatility on offense is pretty ridiculous. And his shooting, which was maybe his biggest question mark coming into college, really exceeded all expectations there. 39% from three, like I mentioned, on very decent volume, 3.6 attempts per game, 79% from the free throw line. So that suggests that that's not some crazy fluke or anything like that, just under 80%. He was 41% from three on catch and shoot. So that's a really good number as well. But he also made 37% of his pull-up threes, which gives a little bit of optimism that he'll continue to expand that part of his game, even though a lot of people tend to think of him not really as like an isolation scorer or a guy that can go get his own shot. But you have to respect that part of his game based on what we saw at Duke. He's also elite footwork, very good finisher through contact in the paint, made roughly 60% of his half-court attempts at the rim, despite creating many of those for himself. Again, over 7 free throw attempts per game. And aside from the footwork, and also big body guys down low. So most of the cons for Boozer are a lot of like, well, he's not the best athlete. He doesn't have elite vertical pop. The first step isn't super great in terms for a guy going this high that you want to build around. Like the quick athleticism and moves here and there just aren't really there. So a lot of people think he's probably going to maybe not be a number one option in the NBA. Creating separation hasn't been something that he's done consistently. Again, relies more on footwork and physicality and getting guys, off balance rather than consistently like driving past somebody or putting on some fancy dribble move to get by and it create an advantage that way. So all of those are fair. I think defensively also, he's a little bit of a tweener potentially. I think he might struggle a little bit guarding out in space, depending on how quick and small the guy he's on the perimeter is, but he's also not going to be a prototypical rim protector and play the 5 full time or anything like that. He's likely going to need a rim protecting center next to him, but again, that's going to put him in more perimeter defensive rotations, which he held up mostly fine there at Duke, but I don't think that's going to be necessarily a strength for him. But ultimately, I think people are underselling Boozer's ceiling, and a lot of the cons you hear are it feels like people trying to talk themselves into not liking him. And so I think Boozer, again, very high floor. I would not be surprised if he averaged 20 and 10 out of the gate, especially with the opportunity he's going to have in Memphis. But ultimately, he's a 6'8", 6'9" guy that can shoot, pass, rebound, score inside, operate in the pick and roll, and processes the game at an elite level with a high IQ and is immensely versatile on offense. So the advanced stats, love this guy. The athletic limitations, sure, people are going to have questions there, but who's also not very athletic? Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, even someone like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, not an elite athlete. So like the idea that you can't be an elite engine or elite player in the NBA or even a top 5 to top 10 player in the NBA without being some special athlete is very misguided. And I think he has the opportunity to get there still. So I have Cam Boozer as an all-star, and I think all three, the top 3, really are going to get to that level. And so I do want to open up a little bit of a discussion on that in terms of where do I rank these 3 guys? Because if you've listened to any of my previous years doing this, you know that I've never picked 3 all-stars in the top 3 in the past. And I've only picked 2 of the 3 top 3 to be an all-star in 2 of my 4 previous years. So this is not typical for me to go into this and just pick the top 3 picks as all-stars every single year. In fact, I've had a bust in the top 3 almost every single year that I've done this. I picked Zach Risache as a bust. I picked Brandon Miller as a bust, which that looks like a miss on at this point. And I even had concerns about Chet Holmgren's health coming out of college as well. So I've had skepticism about guys in the top 3 in the past. But this year, I'm extremely optimistic and bullish on all of the top 3. And it is a rare year where I think all 3 of these guys in a normal draft would be worthy of a number 1 pick. I think all 3 of these guys I would honestly pick based on need, which is not something I would normally tell a team who's got the number 1 pick. You just take the best player available and move on and figure it out. But I think it is such a razor thin margin between these guys. And it all comes down to kind of risk aversion, personal preference. Like, do you want the safer pick? Do you want the higher upside pick? Like, what are you most comfortable with here? And I think, again, that all comes kind of down to what kind of team do you have? Like AJ Dybantsa, I think if you're a team that is looking for a franchise offensive engine go-to guy that you can kind of hand the keys to, I think he probably makes the most sense. But if you want to go for more of an upside play where maybe you could afford to miss and you've got other talented guys on the team in place, I think Peterson makes a ton of sense there, who's got a little bit more risk, but the upside could arguably be the highest among the three. And then Boozer, if you're a team that's looking for more of like a culture setter, a guy that's going to make everybody around him better, and a guy that's just been a winner, like I think he makes a lot of sense, and I think he's kind of fit proof. I like if there's not really a team I'd be like, I didn't love the Boozer fit there. But the upside maybe is a little bit less than the other two. So it really just depends. So I'm not trying to cop out here. Gun to my head, if you made me rank them 1 to 3 for like a clean slate, like expansion team, I'm picking one of these guys. I think I would go AJ 1, Boozer 2, Peterson 3. Again, that doesn't mean I think Boozer's like definitely a better prospect than Peterson. I think Peterson has a higher bust potential, and I think Boozer's ceiling gets underrated, but I think AJ's kind of the perfect thread the needle of like, I think he's got a much higher floor than Peterson, but a higher ceiling than Boozer as well. So he's kind of that in between there. Versus Boozer, I kind of know what I'm getting, but I also think he could still be an all NBA guy. Peterson, all NBA, like lead guard, offensive engine potential, but you're still kind of like hoping that a few things go your way because there were some at least yellow flags with him. And I think the gap between these three and number 4 is massive. I think Caleb Wilson is honestly not even in this discussion, even though some people kind of wanted to make it one. But I think the top 3 are interchangeable. And I know, again, that's kind of a cop out, but I really would base my pick based on fit. And that could be positionally, but it also could be what type of player and archetype do you need to fill out the rest of your roster. Like Utah, they've got a bunch of forwards. So I think Peterson was the right pick for them, even if they had the number 1 pick. Washington, they kind of need the guy moving forward. So I think AJ made sense for them. And then, Boozer, with John Moran out the door and their general type of culture that they like to build, the grit and grind and whatnot, I think Boozer made a lot of sense for them too. So I feel like all 3 teams kind of ended up with the right guy. And I think if you switch the order, I'm not sure the players would have been drastically different team to team there. Okay, moving to number 4, the Bulls took Caleb Wilson out of UNC, another one and done freshman, another big time recruit coming out, and arguably the best pure athlete in this draft. A little bit more raw offensively, but still put up big stats, 20 points per game, 9 rebounds, just under 3 assists. He measured in at 6'9" with a 7-foot wingspan, weighed 210 pounds. He did miss the end of the season after fracturing his left hand and then re-injuring his right thumb while preparing to return. So bummer that he didn't get to play down the stretch in March, but regardless, Caleb Wilson, the number one thing about him, absolutely elite level athlete, and probably the best in the draft. Explosive with his second jumps, covers ground extremely well, constant lob threat, big threat in transition as well, great as a cutter and on the offensive glass, and he runs the floor really well for a guy his size. I think defensively he's got a lot of upside and has showed playmaking there. He averaged just under 3 stocks per game in his freshman season. He's got mobility to be able to defend outside and the length and explosiveness to provide really good weak side help defense in the paint as a rim protector, plays with a high motor, regularly makes chase down and recovery type plays and effort plays on the defensive end. And he's got the tools to be able to guard multiple positions. But with that athleticism became great rim pressure. As I mentioned, elite vertical spacing. He led all of college basketball in dunks before he broke his hand and is comfortable finishing with either hand. He's a great lob finisher, great as a cutter, as I mentioned, and he also 7.5 free throws per game. So he certainly knows how to draw contact and fouls as well, and was a pretty solid rebounder at 9.4 per game, despite playing not primarily center for them. He had Henry Vesar next to him at UNC. There was some flashes as a passer and connectivity there too. 2.7 assists to 2.0 turnovers, not spectacular, but you're not asking him to be the main ball handler or anything like that. And then just generally, he's a little frail, but he's got the tools and the frame to be able to, once he fills in a little bit, could be just an absolute athletic monster. But there are a lot of question marks with Wilson. There's a reason that I had him clearly not a part of the top 3 in this class. And primarily it's the jump shot. He shot only 26% from 3 this past season. He only took 1.1 attempts, so defenses weren't really respecting that shot. He made only 26% on catch and shoot jumpers, 35% off the dribble jumpers, only 71% from the free throw line. Again, that's not terrible, but it's not great. It's certainly below average. And so there's really no proof of him as a jump shooter, really in any capacity. He just didn't shoot the ball well and hasn't. And so that's going to be a real question mark of offensively in the half court. What can he be besides a guy as a lob threat and attacking the basket? It could create spacing issues for guys around him. The handle also still a little raw. And aside from the shooting, when he isn't dunking, his finishing was really not that great. He made only 46% of his half-court layups and 38% of his floaters. Overall, his 58% field goal is going to look really good, but a lot of that is really powered by his dunks and athleticism. And so you have to wonder, once he gets to the NBA and the defenders guarding him are a little bit more likely to match some of that athleticism and take away some of those clean vertical opportunities, what's that going to look like? Is he going to be as efficient? Can he get shots and make them at a rate that's close to what he did in college if he can't just dunk it every single time? And so that paired with the little bit of a loose handle, where I just don't think he's ready to be a legitimate creator. He doesn't have a go-to shot. His decision-making can be a little raw still as well, even though he's got some passing flashes. And he also needs more functional strength. He's only 210 pounds. He can be moved off his spots a little easier than you'd like. So he's going to need to fill out there too. So ultimately, I have Caleb Wilson as a role player. I see the offensive upside, but that's kind of it. I don't see the practicality of the theory of what he could be offensively coming to fruition right now. And yes, I agree that if he can become a 36% shooter from deep, or he can tighten the handle where he can, run offense through him as more of a hub, then absolutely he could be an all-star. But it's really hard for bigs to be all-star level guys unless they are more of that hub that can create and make guys around him better, or be threats from outside. And he doesn't do either of those things right now. So I think if you're betting on Wilson as an all-star, you are betting on projection over production, just because his solo creation really only comes from dunks and transition and putbacks and straight line drives. And he's heavily dependent on others to create advantages for him in the half court. And that's not a trait that typically leads to all-star level. I also will add that his defense, while I think he's got a ton of potential there, his feel on that end is not elite. So I know he's gotten Evan Mobley comparisons. Mobley's got a lot better feel on defense generally, even though they have similar tools. So again, I don't think Wilson's going to bust or anything like that, just because I do think he can be a useful defensive player. He can be a useful transition player, be a really useful guy that a elite creator next to him can use as a tool. But I just don't see him being the guy that's driving those. So I do have him as a role player. Next, we have Keaton Wagler going number 5 to the Los Angeles Clippers. Another one and done freshman. This one was way less expected, though. Wagler was not even a top 100 recruit coming out of high school, and somehow played his way into being a top 5 pick in this draft. During the early part of the season for Illinois, he became the lead guard, and their offense took off. They eventually make a Final Four, and he was really the driving force for this offense. He comes in at 6'5", 6'6" wingspan, only 188 pounds, so a little bit on the frailer side there, but he averaged 18 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, shot 40% from deep, 45% from the field. And that shot is really the fallback skill for Wagler here. One of the cleanest jump shots in the draft. Again, 40% on 6 attempts per game. Comfortable both off the catch and off the dribble. He had a 9 for 11 from 3 game against Purdue, in which he dropped 46 points, which was really the game that kind of put him on the map and into the lottery. He's got very deep range and enough versatility to shoot out of ball screens. So, he's not just a catch and shoot, not just a stand in the corner guy. Like, he can make shots really with the ball, without the ball, in most types of roles there. He's also got quite good feel and IQ. He doesn't get rushed super easily. He can dribble a little bit. He can pass. He processes the game well. He manipulates defenders in space with hesitations and decelerations. He's crafty in that way, where he's not blowing by guys and winning with athleticism, but he reads angles well and can get to his spots that way. And he was a pretty damn good playmaker this past season. 4.2 assists to only 1.8 turnovers. That's a really healthy ratio right there. He operated with an insane amount of pick and roll volume. He had nearly 600 pick and rolls run this past season and produced at 1.1 points per play, which is a really good number for college. He makes reads quickly and gets the offense organized as needed. However, he has real limitations athletically. People want to talk about Boozer's athleticism like it's nothing compared to Wagler's. Like, he doesn't have a great burst. He doesn't have a great first step. He doesn't really have much vertical pop. Like, he attempted only 1 dunk all season and he missed it. He finished only 55% of his shots at the rim. He made only 40% of his drives. And he just has a difficult time creating separation consistently. Like I said, he is crafty, and so he can get his shot off with hesitations, decelerations, and all of those types of moves. But he's really relying on those because he's not going to blow by guys with that big first step or anything like that. And so he just doesn't generate easy advantages against high-level defenders. And more athletic, stronger, bigger, more filled out NBA defenders may be able to recover a little bit more if he initially does create an angle. He also has almost no in-between game whatsoever. So, he did get to the basket at a decent clip, and we obviously know he can shoot, but he shot only 33% from mid-range on low volume. So there's no sort of proof of concept there. He made only 34% of his floaters. So if defenders run him off the line and stay attached, he may not really have a super efficient fallback shot. And so, again, with better, more physical, more athletic defensive players on him, it's a real question of whether that's going to translate or not. Also, context of some guys will kind of excuse some underperformance, like Darryn Peterson, like I mentioned previously, but they can also prop up guys. And his college environment definitely amplified what we saw out of him. Illinois had a very consistent 5-out offense that created excellent driving lanes for him. Their offense was very pro style. So their guard-to-guard screening also frequently generated favorable matchups there. And so I'm not saying I'm not going to blame the entire system of the reason he looks so good, but I'm just saying he was in a really good spot on a team that really amplified his strengths and put him in position to succeed. And so overall, I'm just not totally positive about his on-ball primary skills as like an offensive engine, and he may fall back into more of a secondary creator role. And then defensively, that athleticism also is not certainly helping him out in any capacity. He only had 34 steals in 37 games, 14 blocks on the year, lean frame, and nearly neutral wingspan. So defensively, there's not a lot of indicators that say he's going to be above average there or even average. And so overall, I just feel like he's got kind of a small margin for error. And so I do actually have him as a bust, because if the jumper is just good, not great, it's difficult to pick another bankable NBA skill that this guy has. I know he can run a little bit of pick and roll, but that alone, when you're not an elite level playmaker type, which I don't think he is, and he doesn't have the elite level handle either to be necessarily elite guard, I just don't know what the fallback skill for him is going to be unless he's like some otherworldly shooter, in which case he still may not pan out to be an all-star, but still be more of a role player. And so I understand the upside on him and why people like a guy that can shoot, pass, and has good feel, all of that. But I just think his lack of athleticism and lack of size, like he's bigger in terms of height, but he's frail. He doesn't have length on the perimeter in terms of wingspan or anything like that. And I just think at a higher level of competition, I think it might not look the same. And so I do have Keaton Wagler as a bust. Then moving to Mikel Brown Jr., number 6, to the Brooklyn Nets out of Louisville, another one-and-done freshman. measured in at just under 6'4", 190 pounds, averaged 18 points, 4.7 assists, 3.1 turnovers, 41% from the field, 34%. And Brown, while a little inconsistent, when he's on, he can be absolutely special offensively. The shooting indicators, despite not the best percentages necessarily in college, they were there, though. He took 8 attempts from 3, and he's 84% from the free throw line. He was 48% from 3 at the U19 World Cup that he played previously before Louisville, so there is somewhat of a track record there as a shooter. And he shoots pull-ups, step backs, off movements, spot up, all that. Like, he's got the bag as a shooter. It can really shoot it from anywhere. He's a threat at any point, despite the fact that the percentages were not spectacular, but the volume was a little lower because he was injured during his tenure at Louisville. Along with that, he's a shot maker. He makes difficult shots, and that includes jumpers, as I mentioned, but also he's a crafty finisher inside. He can use either hand. He can change angles, finish against a defender's momentum, all of that. And he did show plenty of flashes as a playmaker and a passer as well. Just under 5 assists, as I mentioned. He's comfortable firing kind of riskier passes, but sometimes they pay off, obviously. He can make the difficult pass and also operate out of the pick and roll and help manipulating defenses there. But a lot of Mikel Brown's highs, he has equally bad lows. You know, he is just generally not a very efficient player. He shot only 41% from the field, 34% from 3. He had a 10 for 16 game. So, yeah, we can see the upside there. But if you take that game out as clearly a bit of an outlier, he shot only 31% from 3 across the rest of the season. So that even bumped him up 3 percentage points just from one game. And because he shoots such high volume, he can really shoot his team out of games sometimes. The shooting projections at this point is mostly on mechanics and prior results rather than actual production in college, which is always a little bit concerning to me. I also think, despite him being a capable passer, because he's sporadic, the decision-making for those passes is not always great. Like, again, 4.7 turnovers, but 3.1 assists. I mean, a 1.5 assist to turnover ratio is not terrible, but it is certainly weaker for a guy that you want to be your lead guard. Turnovers even climbed up to 3.5 per game in conference play. So as the level of competition got higher, he struggled even more. And so, yes, he can be creative as a passer, but it's neutralized a bit because the decisions he makes and tries to fit in tight windows and can make an advanced read one position and then force an unnecessary pass on the next one. And that decision-making bleeds into his shot selection, where he takes a lot of very difficult pull-ups, which he didn't make at a super high clip, and becomes overly aggressive hunting his own shot sometimes. And so all of that, I also don't really know if he's cut out to be a full-time point guard. He wants to get his shot up, and so he might be better off playing more as a off-ball kind of guy to be able to get those shots. But the problem is he's small and frail enough where I don't think he'll be able to hold up defensively as a full-time 2 guard. You know, he's 6'3.5", 190 pounds. I just don't think he's got the frame where he can be able to consistently succeed in that role on defense. Also, all the talk with Darryn Peterson and his injuries and all of that, Mikel Brown Jr. had serious back issues throughout all of college and played less games than Peterson did. And he's the one who gets the bad rep, and we kind of overlook it and don't really care about Brown. So I think that's at least something to consider. All of that to say, I have Brown as a bust. I think the talent is clearly there. He was a big recruit coming out of high school as well. But I just think the decision-making, the shot selection, the lack of a proven shot, all that stuff is just a little too much when you add it all up together to me, where, sure, could I see him be a guy that could average 20 points per game at some point in his career, or a guy that could drop 50 in a given game? Sure. But is he going to do it consistently? Is he going to drive winning basketball over the course of a full season, or is there going to be more high-scoring nights here and there and then highlight plays, etc.? So I do have Mikel Brown Jr. as a bust. Next, we have Darius Acuff at number 7 going to the Kings, another one-and-done freshman. You're noticing a trend here. Out of Arkansas, measured in at 6'2", 185, averaged 23.5 points per game for Arkansas, 6.4 assists, 3.1 rebounds, 48% from the field, 44% from 3 on just under 6 attempts. And Acuff was an absolute offensive machine, offensive engine. the thing that made Arkansas go last year. There's not a lot of examples of freshmen coming in and putting up those kind of stats at the lead guard position, 24-6, and on that kind of efficiency and volume from shooting from deep. Like, he's one of the best one-on-one scorers in the draft. Doesn't even need a screen to create separation. He's got a terrific handle, can a good change of pace on that front as well. He can get defenders off balance. He's comfortable creating in the late clock, and Arkansas constantly got bailed out by him late in games, and the reason they weren't better is because they just didn't have enough around him offensively. But he's a legit 3-level scorer. I mean, 44% from 3 on 6 attempts per game. That is legit. 81% from the free throw line as well. Drew 6 free throws per game, so he got to the line. He converted when he was there. He could score off the pull-up, on the floater, at rim finishing, step back, spot up. He's just really difficult to cover because he's a threat at any point on the court. Aside from just the 44% in general, though, he was 49% on catch and shoot threes and 45% on NBA range threes. So, like, the shot is going to translate. Like, he was just so great as a shooter last season, and it gives me confidence that that's a sustainable jumper there. He also was a lot better than advertised as a playmaker and passer. Over 6 assists per game in college is not a number to balk at. Good lob passer, just generally read rotations well. He had multiple 10-plus assist games with 0 turnovers, just more willing on that front than you'd think for a guy that averaged 24 points per game and was an elite scorer. And even though he's a little smaller at 6'2", he plays a little bigger and more physical than you'd think. You know, he doesn't avoid contact. He plays with confidence in big moments. Was really clutch last year for Arkansas, so generally just has that kind of toughness and dog in him, I would say. But there's one big glaring thing with Acuff where his defense is a mess. It's really bad. Watch the tape. It's not good. Only 1.1 stocks total per game last year. Frequently loses focus off ball. Gets caught ball watching. Doesn't consistently fight through screens. Arkansas was 10 points per 100 possessions. Worst defensively with him on the floor. So it was noticeable by the numbers. It was noticeable when you watched the games. Like, his defense was very, very, very bad. And so I don't have any concerns about the offense, but defensively, he might be so bad where we get into kind of that Trae Young territory where it's like, is it so untenable that is he even necessarily for sure a positive player? So I do have Acuff as an all-star, but I'll preface this that it would not shock me or surprise me at all if he's one of those guys that is legitimately great offensively, but so bad defensively that is it actually leading to winning? Is the offensive actually impactful enough to overcome the shortcomings of the defense? That I don't know the answer to, but for the purpose of this, I think he's going to be a special guard creator. He's a little undersized, but I think he's really talented enough to fit into that sort of Dame Lillard, Kyrie Irving type archetype of player that's just can go get a bucket from anywhere on the court whenever he wants. And sure, the defense might be rough. I'm not positive he's going to be a full-time winning player all the time, but I do know for sure that he's going to score a lot. And I feel pretty confident that, we tend to give all-star nods to guys that score even when their defense isn't great. So I do have him getting a nod at some point. Next, number 8, we have Kingston Fleming, another one-and-done freshman from Houston, a consensus top 10 recruit entering the season. Averaged 16 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, 48% from the field, 39% from 3. And there's a lot to like about Kingston Fleming. He's a really, really good athlete, especially for his size. One of the quickest guards in the draft, a lightning quick first step, explosive off 1 or 2 feet. He covers ground extremely well in transition. He turns the corner really well in the pick and roll, and the athletic tools are already kind of NBA caliber. He also was a very, very good playmaker. 5.2 assists to 1.8 turnovers. That's nearly a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. If you've listened to my podcast, you know that that's a big indicator stat for me that I really look for and care about. Very good live dribble passer, particularly good finding roll men, cross-court shots, weak side kickouts, that sort of thing, and doesn't over-dominate the ball. He's also very good in the mid-range. He shot 46% on pull-up jumpers in the mid-range. He's comfortable stopping on a dime, high release point, can get the shot over people despite his smaller frame there. And he does have good indicators from the three-point line. It was lower volume, but 39% from 3, 85% from the free throw line. So obviously has good touch overall. The mechanics aren't bad. He also takes care of the ball, as I mentioned. However, I do have some legitimate concerns with Fleming. He measured at just 6'2.5" with a 6'3.5" wingspan. That's a really, really small wingspan, which concerns me a lot defensively, and his ability to get off shots over guys. He's smaller than the average NBA point guard, and he doesn't have the length to compensate for it. So that's a tough combination across the board. I do think he's going to get hunted defensively against bigger guards and wings. And even though I love a lot of his intangibles and his brain and processing and all of that, reminds me a lot of Reed Shepherd a few years ago when I was super, super high on him because all the advanced metrics love him and I love the high IQ stuff and all that. But then you watch him in an NBA game and he just looks tiny. And he's not a bad player. He's not going to be a bust. He's going to carve out a career for himself. But I had him as an all-star, and I kind of don't want to make that same mistake here because I'm worried Fleming's going to have a little bit of the same where he just looks really small. And none of that is helped by the fact that his playing style really is not conducive to modern NBA. He doesn't put much pressure on the rim. He averaged only 3.5 free throw attempts per game, pretty low for a high usage guard like him. Only 39% of his shots came at the rim, while just 23% came from three. That leaves a unusually large percentage of his offense coming from the mid-range. And that's a shot that NBA offenses are going to live with and want him to shoot, even though he's effective there. Like a small guard that wants to live in the mid-range is just not an archetype of player that's super successful across the NBA right now. And he doesn't yet have that reliable floater in the in-between, so he's more of a pull-up guy from there. And he also hasn't shot high volume from three. Even the percentages weren't bad. He also struggled a lot more against better competition in college. He shot only 54% true shooting against quad 1 and quad 2 opponents. His efficiency dropped 12 percentage points compared to quad 3 and quad 4. So he was way more efficient against lower quality of competition. And he's going to be facing guys a lot better than quad 1 and quad 2. I know that Houston's offense relied a lot on him and didn't have a lot of spacing and stuff for him. But regardless, between the track record against high competition, the insistence on mid-range shooting, and the lack of size and length, it's just a lot of concerns for me. And beginning of the year, I was high on Flemings and was probably going to pick him to even maybe be an all-star. But the more time went on, and I'm kind of learning my lesson on some of these small guards that don't have super dynamic skill sets. Like, yeah, Acuff is small too, but Acuff is a special creator and high level, 3-level scorer. There's just so many translatable skills that are going to allow him to make up for that. He's also got a 6'7" wingspan. Whereas Fleming's I like a lot of the intangibles, like I mentioned. He's got some translatable skills, but they're all kind of like marginal skills. Like, is he going to be a high volume 3-point shooter? I don't know that to be true based on what we saw in college. Is he going to be some elite level playmaker that makes everybody around him better? It's possible, but again, I don't know if we saw enough of that to conclude that for sure. And I think he could just become a liability defensively at times. So I understand why people like him, but I do unfortunately have Flemings as a bust. I could see him. I could see him turning into a nice backup point guard, a la a TJ McConnell type. Obviously, he's like more athletic and got a little bit more dynamicism than McConnell, and the shot's obviously better than what we've seen out of McConnell. I'm not comparing him to him necessarily. I'm just saying that type of role where like good ball handler, guy you trust off the bench, but not necessarily a guy you can rely on in a more scaled, larger role. But for smaller guards in the NBA to become star, I really think they either need to have elite rim pressure, which Flemings doesn't have, elite 3-point volume, which Flemings doesn't have, or be a truly elite playmaker, and I don't think he has that either. Number 9, we have Morez Johnson Jr. going to the Dallas Mavericks. This is a sophomore on the college basketball March Madness champion, Michigan Wolverines. He measured in at 6'9" with a 7'4" wingspan, comes in at 250. Averaged 13 and 7 this past season on 62% from the field, so very efficient overall. And look, Morez Johnson, I'll cut to the chase a little bit here. He's not going to be a star. He doesn't have the skill set there, but he could be a damn good role player in the NBA if everything pans out for him. He's a really, really good defensive player, and he's got immense versatility here. He can guard multiple positions. He's smaller out on the perimeter. He's mobile enough to be able to defend in space, but he's also strong enough to be able to guard up. in the paint if he wants to be more of a small ball five, which ultimately I think it could be his best position on a winning team here. And he's got a rare blend of that lateral quick distance strength for a guy that's 250 pounds. So aside from that, the 7'4" wingspan, extremely strong lower body. He's light on his feet despite that size. So he's constantly winning physical battles, whether it be with smaller guys or bigger guys. And that's just going to lend himself to being a really good defensive player, which is going to give himself an immensely high floor. So I have no doubts about the defense translating. The question about how good he's going to be is going to come down to that offense. He was a very good finisher in college, 62% from the field, finished over 70% of his shots at the rim. He has very good hands, very good lob threat, finishes through contact, doesn't need plays called for him on that end. And then he just has really good role player qualities. He's a really good screen setter, rolls hard every possession, very good offensive rebounder, runs the floor consistently, plays with great energy, and one of those players who can impact winning without even touching the ball. The biggest question marks for him are going to be the jump shot. He didn't attempt a single three in his freshman year at Illinois, and he shot only 34% from three at Michigan last year, under one attempt per game. 34% is not awful, but obviously it was low volume. And his free throw percentage did go all the way up from 62% as a freshman to 78% last year. So that is also a very encouraging number there, because that's a good indicator that the touch could at least come along there. But look, you're not going to run plays for him in the half court. If it's not rolls, cuts, offensive rebounds, or dump offs, like, I just don't think he's ever going to be more than a guy who can operate in those scenarios. I don't see him being some sort of offensive hub. I think it's not that he's got a bad feel for the game, but he certainly isn't some above average playmaker for his position. And if he can't shoot, it makes playing the four that much harder in the modern NBA. But the thing is, there's no guarantee he could be a full-time five either, because he's undersized at 6'9". He doesn't have the height of a traditional rim protector. I think some of the bigger fives he would probably struggle against, and he may need to be paired with another big like he was at Michigan, where they were massive with him and Lendeborg and Aday Mara. And so, yeah, the ceiling is just going to have question marks. Can he ever create for himself? I'm not sure I see that. But it's going to come down to the three-point shot. If he can develop into a 35 to 37% three-point shooter, then yeah, I think the sky for him as a role player is the limit, because I think that he can just be a absolutely invaluable 3-and-D wing guy. And we just saw a guy with a similar build to him in Colin Murray-Boyles look really impressive down the stretch of the playoffs last year. I think Murray-Boyles has a lot more offensive skill and a feel for the game on that end. But a lot of the other things he does as like a rebounder, as a defender, as a big body down low, like, I think Morez Johnson can replicate a lot of that, and he can be a nice player. So I do have Johnson as a role player. I just think the floor of his defense is going to be something he can fall back on. How good of a role player is going to come down to the jump shot. Again, if he stays in the low 30s, then, probably not more than just a complimentary guy off the bench. But if he can get that into the 35% or above from deep consistently, then yeah, I think that there's a real opportunity for him to be like a very, very high level starter. Moving to number 10 with Brayden Burries, another one and done freshman, this time out of Arizona. Kitsets' top 10 recruit who really played his best basketball down the stretch of last season, took Arizona to a Final Four, averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 49% from the field, 39% from three. And Burries was a really polished three-level scorer last season. He showed really advanced footwork. He doesn't rely on burst to score, but he's comfortable operating in the isolation, in the pick and roll, and the mid-range from three. And particularly was very solid from deep last year. 39% from three on 4.6 attempts. He was 39% on catch and shoot threes, 40% on pull-up threes. So, interchangeable there, can shoot the ball in either scenario with or without the ball. 81% from the free throw line, another encouraging shooting indicator there. And he can really play offensively on or off the ball. He's got good pace and balance offensively and does project as a strong complementary scorer. I don't know if I see the on-ball full-time thing out of him. But, he showed flashes of that in college last year. And then defensively, he projects pretty well. I do think that he is a guy that plays super hard there. He's got a good motor, good anticipation. Did average 1.5 steals a game, which is a really healthy number. So he was a playmaker for Arizona there last year. However, I do have concerns about Burries too. I think a lot of people have just kind of slotted him in as this no doubt about it, at least role player that like I know he can play in the NBA right now. But I have concerns because I think on offense he's a bit of a tweener. He does not project as a lead guard. I don't think the handle is necessarily there. I also don't think he's the type of playmaker that could be a full-time guard necessarily, sort of running the offense and orchestrating everything there. But he's also not particularly big. He's under 6'4". He measured in at 6'3" of an inch. 6'6" wingspan's not awful, but again, it comes back to the thing with Flemings a little bit, where I'm like, he doesn't have any standout, clear cut, like translatable skill other than shooting, which sure can get you some places. But I worry a little bit about the size. Like, how many 6'3" two guards are high level guys in the league right now? So I think that he's going to need to be able to either be like an elite level shooter and really good defensively to be able to play the off guard, or he's going to need to develop skills as more of a lead guard, because he can score, but I don't think he consistently like bends defense. Defenses aren't reacting to him. The handle's okay, but it's not dynamic. He doesn't really pressure the rim at an elite rate. Like, he's more of a secondary creator and someone you want initiating every single possession. Also, going back to the shooting, I know he shot it well, but it's certainly not a complete sure thing with him, because he kind of struggled as a shooter in high school. That was really his first full season where he shot the ball well. The mechanics look good, but the sample size is relatively small. It's basically one season of him shooting at a high level. And so we'll see if that can be sustained or not. But ultimately with Burries, this was one of the ones I went a little back and forth on, and I wasn't totally sure. I definitely don't see him as an all-star. That was never something I really considered, just because I don't see the special traits with him. But I ultimately went bust just because I feel like I was kind of trying to talk myself into him. And like I said, I don't see the elite level NBA trait. And sure, he could be a little bit of a do everything type guy, but he's a little smaller than I'd like for that type of role. And maybe if he was 6'6", I would have a different opinion. And I know that sounds nitpicky, but I'm telling you, man, the margins matter once you get to the highest level here. And for a guy like him that, isn't going to be dominant at any one single facet of the game, and also can't really fall back on his physical traits, I just am not sure. Other than the fact that people like he's got a good motor and tries hard and competes, like I get all that, but sometimes that's not necessarily enough to get you over the top. Next, we have Yaxel Lendeborg from Michigan, going number 11 to the Warriors. This was a fifth-year senior who transferred to Michigan and became the best player on the national champions last year at Michigan. He averaged 15 points, just under 7 rebounds, just over 3 assists, 52% from the field, 37% from 3. Measures in at 6'9" with a 7'3" wingspan, 241. Got really an elite frame and length for the modern kind of combo forward. And he was really good defensively for Michigan and really throughout his whole college career. But he's got size and mobility to guard really 3 through 5 if he had to. At 5, you probably don't want doing in large stints, but at least I think he's capable of that. Very good help defender, rotates early, rarely misses assignments, can switch on to guards while also protecting the rim when needed, and the motor runs really every possession for him on that end of the court. And for his size, he moves really well. He's strong enough to kind of battle inside, but fluid enough to defend on the perimeter there. And then offensively, he was the kind of quote-unquote go-to option for Michigan last year. Don't think he's going to really project for that, but he's at least a connective piece. He averaged 3 assists to only 1 turnover, so a really good assist-to-turnover ratio there. He's comfortable attacking closeouts. He makes the extra pass. He can operate in the short roll. He handles a bit in transition. Does not need high usage to impact winning. I mean, the guy was an All-American first team, only 15 points per game, which you don't see necessarily a ton. And the swing skill for him was always the jump shot. And he showed great improvement there last year. 82% from the free throw line is a great indicator, but he shot 37% from 3 as well. Attempted 4.5 threes per game, showed real confidence rising and firing there. His 3-point percentage didn't really drop or rise depending whether it was a catch and shoot or pull up. So that's a little bit encouraging as well. And if the jumper becomes a consistent theme where it's like he's just hitting 38% on a regular basis, then he's just going to be a really good modern 3-and-D guy. He's also a winning player, obviously, and impacts the game outside of just the box score, yada, 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 high basketball IQ, all of those things. He does have some things to give you a slight pause. I mean, he's 24 as a rookie, so he's old. So, what you're getting off the bat might be kind of what you're getting with him. He's not going to be some, develops into some later version of, he's he's old. He's old for a rookie. And so physically, he's probably closer to his ceiling than a lot of other prospects here. Despite being the best player for Michigan, he was a little limited offensively in terms of self-creation. He was better when attacking advantages that were kind of already created for him. He doesn't consistently beat defenders one-on-one, doesn't have the dynamic first step, but he's also not really like a post guy or anything like that. And his jump shot, despite it being solid, he opened the year shooting 40% from the beginning part of the year, then had a 14-game stretch where he shot below 20%, then finished the season over 40% during the title run. So he was a little up and down here in terms of just consistently knocking it down from out there. So we want to obviously see bigger sample there and see, if he can stabilize that jumper to be a little bit more consistent. But overall, I've got Lendeborg as a role player. I just think that the physical traits plus the defense and what he brings on that end, I think the shot will be good enough to be respectable. And then he does a lot of the little things. I think it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. Obviously, he's not going to be the go-to guy like it was in college. But I think he can have an impact right off the bat because he's a little older, because he's a little bit more developed. And I think ultimately he checks a lot of the boxes there. Next at number 12, we had the OKC Thunder taking Aday Mara, also out of Michigan, the third Michigan player picked in this lottery. And this was his third collegiate season after transferring from UCLA to Michigan. Was a pretty well-regarded prospect coming in to UCLA, but really underperformed there and then regained his stock at Michigan this past season. Mara averaged 12 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, 67% from the field. And this dude is just massive. He is huge, elite level size, 7'3" with a 7'6" wingspan, a 9'9" standing reach, weighs in at 259 pounds. He just played above everybody last year. Huge catch radius, creates easy finishing angles around the basket because of it. He's got NBA-ready strength and was an elite interior finisher as a result. 67% from the field, like I mentioned. He's got good touch with either hand. He's comfortable finishing layups. He's got a little bit of a hook shot, got a little bit of a floater. Obviously a lob threat as a dunker as well. Keeps the ball high off of catches, so it limits turnovers on that front. Doesn't waste movement around the basket, one of the more efficient interior scorers in this class. And then defensively, he's just an elite rim protector because of it. He averaged 2.6 blocks per game, one of the best marks in college basketball. Very good timing, doesn't chase blocks recklessly, but uses his verticality very well. True deterrent around the basket. But I think the skill that people really like about him most was that he's a very underrated passer. Averaged 2.4 assists, but if you watch the film, it's even a little better, and you can see the feel for the game there. He wasn't superly involved offensively outside of being a lob threat, but he's a good handoff passer. He finds cutters consistently. He's good passing out of the post, and he actually posted the highest assist rate ever by a college player 7'2" or taller. So for his size, I know it's a high bar because not that many guys are that tall, but very good feel, all things considered there, and that lends to a good basketball IQ. He reads the game well on both ends of the court, understands positioning, makes quick decisions, all of that. With that said, he obviously is not the offensive threat or creator or anything like that where you're going to dump the ball down to him on a consistent basis, where you're going to run offense through him at the top of the key. Really doesn't create much for himself. It's really mostly through post-ups, rolls, dump-offs, offensive rebounds, etc. And the self-creation just really isn't there. The jump shot also not very good. 56% from the free throw line last year. 30% from three, but only 0.3 attempts per game, so not a lot of volume there. Doesn't really provide much spacing whatsoever now. He just is a guy that's going to live in the post and in the paint, and I think for his size, that's probably fine. But obviously, if he ever did develop that jump shot, that's something to add on top of this. But I also, because of his size, the conditioning is a little bit of a question. He can wear down during extended stretches. Don't think he projects to some 35 plus minutes per game guy. You're going to have to kind of monitor some of that. And then also, I think that his size lends him to a more prototypical drop coverage scheme that you're kind of basically going to have to play. Like, he's just not going to have the foot speed to switch onto guards consistently. And teams are going to try to probably pull him away from the basket. And sure, he's not immobile for someone his size, but he's 7'3", almost 260 pounds. So it's like, even a mobile guy at that size is just not going to be as mobile as you need to be able to guard guys out on the perimeter like that. So you're basically going to be boxed into playing drop coverage when he's out there, but that's not the end of the world. There's a lot of really good defensive players that's the case, a la Rudy Gobert. And so I do have Aday Mara as a role player. I think his role is very clear. He's going to be an elite level rim protector, a lob threat, a guy that can rebound, block shots, get dunks, rim run, score off rolls, dump offs, offensive rebounds, all of those things. And he's just enormous. And he's an efficient finisher inside. He's got good touch around the basket. And I think the passing is what really sets him apart here. And so I think Mara is going to be a very, very good role player at that. I could see him being a very high level starter. Again, I don't think he's going to have the creation or have the offensive skill outside of the paint to develop into like an all-star level player. I won't rule it out if he turns into like a Rudy Gobert level defender, because those guys do get their kudos on that front when it happens, but I'm not going to bank on him being that special at that level. I mean, the guy's a 4-time defensive player of the year. So, but I really like Mara. He was one of my favorite picks coming into the draft, and I think he's going to be a really good player. Next, we have Nate Ament, another one and done freshman from Tennessee, averaged 17.6 rebounds, 2 assists. And Ament is a dream from a size and mobility and just physical traits perspective. He's nearly 6'10", very good length, very fluid for his height. His build and frame paint him to be more of a prototypical big scoring wing, which is a very, very valuable archetype in the NBA today. He covers a lot of ground defensively, dangerous in transition, and he just looks like a modern NBA forward physically. Along with that, he's got a lot of at least theoretical offensive skills and versatility. You know, he's comfortable handing the ball for a guy his size. He can run the pick and roll a little bit. He can attack closeouts. He shows flashes as a passer, and he's really dominant in transition. 14% of his points came in transition, which was in the 80th percentile nationally. He can grab and go after rebounds, much more comfortable attacking with space than in the crowded half court. So that's really when he's at his best, and when he can get out and run and take advantage of his size and skill and speed and all of that in one. And defensively, he's got a lot of upside because he can defend either forward spot. He moves well laterally, competes consistently. He's got the physical tools there. They're obviously there. And he was very aggressive getting downhill and going to the basket and didn't shy away from contact. Over 7 free throw attempts per game, which is a very healthy number to be able to draw contact like that. And those things tend to translate well. However, Ament is very much one of those theoretical players. You know, he's got the tools, he's got the skills, but the consistency really on all levels of his game wasn't there. His biggest concern is that he's extremely inefficient. He shot under 40% from the field, only 33%. And the efficiency just across the board did not match the projected offensive upside of what people thought or think he can be. He doesn't create advantages consistently. Like the handle is good for someone his size, but he's not nearly dynamic enough to consistently beat defenders. He doesn't have that explosive first step. He gets bumped off his drives a little too easily, even though he can generate the contact. He's more of a theoretical creator than an actual creator at this point. The finishing was also a major concern for him. He attempted only about 2 half-court shots at the rim per game, but he made only 42% of those attempts. And those are similar to his stats before college as well. He plays a little too upright, doesn't maintain balance through contact. And those are just, if you can't you can't make only 42% of your rim shots if you're 6'10" guy. It's just a number that's not going to pass, especially for a guy who's not shooting particularly well from outside either. Again, 33% from deep, made just 29% of his pull-ups on the season. The mechanics just are a little hitchy, not super great. Again, he did improve down the season a little bit there, but still just no consistency. And look, you put all that together, and it's a guy that's got a lot of confidence to be an offensive engine, to be a dynamic offensive scorer, creator, especially for someone his size. But the reality is none of it really came to fruition. And so I do have Ament as a bust. I'm not big into these theoretical guys. like, yeah, this tools and skill set that of what he could be are nice, but we haven't seen him be it. And I could understand, on a Tennessee team where he's asked to do a little too much, if he's not as efficient as he could be, that's fine. But these were like atrociously bad shooting splits, and I just can't get behind it, especially the finishing in the paint where it was so bad. And you heard when he got drafted, they were trying to hype him up, and they basically were like, well, he tried to get fouled a lot. And I'm like, if that's the best you can say about a guy, then not feeling too good about it. So I do have Ament as a bust. Then the last pick in the lottery, Hans Steinbach, number 14, to the Hornets. Freshman, one and done at Washington after playing professionally in Germany's top league. One of the younger international prospects in the draft. Averaged 18.5 points, 12 rebounds, shot 58% from the field, 34% from three. And Steinbach is an elite level rebounder, one of the very best rebounders in this class, dominated the glass both at Germany and at his lone season at Washington. Again, 12 rebounds a game. That includes 4 offensive rebounds per game. So he's excellent on box outs. He reads the ball coming off the rim exceptionally well. Massive hands, can get really anything that comes near him. He's kind of like a magnet there and is great at creating second chances for his teams. Along with that, very good interior score as well. Again, 58% from the field. He finished 67% of his half-court attempts at the rim. That's a really, really good mark, especially because a lot of those were self-created out of the post. Very good footwork, soft touch with either hand, uses pivots and pump fakes particularly well, and is very good sealing defenders before he gets the ball. Also very good screen and roller. He times his rolls really well. He's comfortable rolling hard, short roll, popping to the arc, off a pick and pop. Already runs NBA style stuff pretty well. Should fit well in a pick and roll or pick and pop level offense. And his passing feel is a little better than people give credit for. Only 1.6 assists, but he's a good decision maker across the board out of the short roll in the high post, etc., and can find cutters and shooters particularly well. And look, the 3-point shot was not perfect, but 34% on 1.8 attempts isn't terrible, and 76% from the line shows that he does have some real touch there. So I do think this is a guy that could turn into a real floor spacer at the center position in the NBA level. And so I wouldn't project him to shoot a ton of those right off the bat, but I think that the touch and the proof of concept of the touch there is big enough for me to think that he could get there at some point, which would obviously greatly raise both the floor and the ceiling on what he can be as an offensive player. Defensively, though, he's not particularly great. He's not an elite rim protector. He's a positional defensive player, as in he can guard centers, but he's not really deterring smaller guys coming into the paint. Wouldn't say that he's ever projects to be a guy that's like anchoring a defense. When he does block shots, it's more just because he's the bigger guy, not because he's got some really good shot blocking instinct or anything. But then he's also not super versatile defensively, where he can't really guard out in space super well. He doesn't have great perimeter mobility across the board. I do think that defensively he could get picked on quite a bit. And so that's going to be an uphill battle for him. And, his ceiling as a player might even come down to just like, how good can he be defensively? Is he going to just be average? Can he get a little bit above average, or is he going to be one of those guys that could get played off the court in the wrong scenario for him? And then offensively, if the shot never comes around, there's not going to be a ton of teams that are like, we're going to run our offense through Hans Steinbach like consistently. So he's probably going to be more complimentary offensively, especially if he can't generate looks from deep and space the floor a little bit more. So ultimately, I have Steinbach as a role player. I think offensively and on the glass, he does enough to be a contributor. And, big guys tend to have a longer leash for this sort of thing just because their role is a little more clear and defined. And so if they work within those parameters, it's a little easier to become a role player. But I don't see him getting to all-star level because I don't know what the offensive ceiling is. And I also am concerned about the defense. I do think that I'm not saying he's some god-awful defender, but I just don't really see the upside there. And I kind of think his best case is just being passable. And so if you're just passable on defense as a big guy, you got to be pretty damn good offensively to justify a big role. So ultimately, I am just going to say role player for Steinbach because I do like a lot of what he does, but I think he is going to have a more specific type role in the NBA. Okay, so just to recap, that is AJ Dybantsa, All-Star. Darryn Peterson, All-Star. Cam Boozer, All-Star. Caleb Wilson, role player. Keaton Wagler, bust. Mikel Brown Jr., bust. Acuff, All-Star. Flemings, bust. Morez Johnson, role player. Brayden Burries, bust. Lendeborg, role player. Mara, role player. Ament, bust. Steinbach, role player. So overall, that's 4 All-Stars, 5 role players, 5 busts. Try to always keep them all in that 4 to 6 range to try to match what the numbers say. So we'll see how I do. I'm going to name a couple other non-lottery guys that I do like a lot, or at least liked where they were taken and are worth the flyer of where they went in the draft. Allen Graves out of Santa Clara went 19 to Toronto. Absolute analytic darling. All the advanced stats love him. I'm kind of a sucker for that stuff, to be honest with you, but he projects as a nice 3-and-D prospect with a little bit more upside there. Not a elite level guy, really anything, but kind of like a jack of all trades who can do a little bit of everything. He can shoot from outside. He's good defensively. He's got good size. Again, good decision maker, etc. So I like Allen Graves at that spot. Jaden Quaitons went 20th to the Spurs. This is a guy who was at one point projected top 5-10 pick when he was coming out of high school initially, has had crazy injuries like a torn ACL and just has not been able to stay on the court, which is why he fell. But I think that if he can get back to full health, he can be a really special defensive player. I think his rim protection ability is, maybe the best in the class, up there with Aday Mara if he does pan out. And he's not super defined his role offensively yet, but I do think he's got the size and talent to be able to carve out a role there as well. So I think he, if health permitting, could turn into a useful NBA player. Joshua Jefferson, 28th to Brooklyn. The shot's a little inconsistent from deep, but that's really the only question mark for me. I like everything else he does. He can defend a little bit. He's good out of the mid-range. He was a proven scorer for one of the better teams in the nation last year. And so, I just like he does a little bit of all the little things here and there. And if he can develop the jump shot more consistently, I think that he could be a really nice 3-and-D guy in the next level. Richie Saunders, 32nd out of BYU to Memphis. This was AJ Dybantsa's teammate who suffered a very serious injury and was out for the season. So he's still recovering from that. But yeah, plays super hard. Not the most physically gifted guy, but he competes defensively. Consistent jump shot from outside. I just think that he's a guy that's going to compete, and he's has the 3-and-D archetype skill set, and I'd like him at the value there. Number 44, Malik Brown to the Spurs. I have very low expectations for him as an offensive player, but he is a special defensive player, like truly gifted. His hands are probably the best in the class, and just defensive playmaking. He didn't even start and still won Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC. Just goes to show how impactful he was on that end of the court. He can really guard 3 through 5, maybe even 2 through 5 if he needed to. And so I just think he's going to be so good defensively still, because that stuff's going to translate, that he could carve out a role for himself. But hey, if he can't make threes, then it could be tough for him. And then Henry Vasar, who fell all the way to 52nd to the Hawks. I was a little surprised by that. I mean, this is a 7-foot guy that spaced the floor consistently last year for UNC. I mean, a guy that is a rim protector, shot blocker, and can make threes. Not the most athletic, not going to have much of an offensive ceiling. Could get picked on defensively on the perimeter, but hey, if any big with that kind of size that can block shots and shoot the way he did, I think is worth taking a flyer on. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to have another podcast out very shortly covering all the offseason stuff that's gone on between all the trades, signings, etc. I know a lot has happened. I've been a little bit behind here, but don't you worry. It is coming very soon. We will also probably have a LeBron James decision very soon, which I'm excited to hear. But again, apologies for this being a little later than I wanted it to be, but I did want to still get it out there, just so I have my picks out there and you guys can hear who I was higher on and lower on. But with that being said, thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you soon.